The scree shifts beneath your boots with a dry and rhythmic crunch that feels far too loud in the unnatural silence of the valley. You are hiking through Isdalen, a place the locals in Bergen have whispered about for centuries, calling it the Valley of Death, because of the way the mist seems to swallow those who lose their footing on the treacherous slopes. The November air is a wheezing and frigid weight against your skin, smelling of damp moss and old stone, but as you round a jagged outcropping of rock, the scent changes. It becomes something acrid and oily, the unmistakable stench of charred meat and chemical accelerant that clings to the back of your throat. There, sprawled across the gray boulders in a position that suggests the body tried to escape itself, lies the blackened shape of what was once a woman. Her skin rendered into a dark and cracked mask, her hands curled as if trying to claw back the very air that failed her. The morning of November 29, 1970, should have been a simple excursion for a university professor and his two young daughters. Yet the sight they stumbled upon in that desolate cleft of rock would become a haunting fixture in the Norwegian psyche. Investigators who scrambled up the scree found the victim lying on her back, her body partially consumed by a fire that had been intense enough to melt the nylon of her stockings into her flesh. Around her, arranged with a precision that felt almost ritualistic, were objects that seemed to deepen the shadow rather than illuminate it. There were two plastic bottles that smelled faintly of petrol, a silver spoon with its monogram meticulously filed away, and a collection of pink phenamol sleeping pills scattered across the stones like dropped petals. Most chilling was what the fire had failed to take: a pair of rubber boots, a plastic cup, and a few scraps of a burned passport, all placed in a manner that suggested they were being offered to the silence of the mountainside. The autopsy would eventually peel back the physical layers of the tragedy, revealing a reality far more harrowing than the initial sight of the scorched earth. Inside her lungs, the medical examiner found traces of carbon monoxide, a clinical confirmation that the woman had been breathing when the flames began to spread across her skin. Her stomach contained a lethal cocktail of over 50 sleeping pills, many of which had not yet dissolved, suggesting a desperate or forced ingestion shortly before the fire was lit. A strange bruise was noted on her neck, perhaps a sign of a blow or a struggle, yet there were no other marks of obvious violence on her charred frame. The police were left with a woman who had been burned alive in a remote valley, surrounded by a strange inventory of items, yet she possessed no name, no wallet, and no history that the Norwegian authorities could recognize. This void of identity was not a matter of circumstance, but seemingly a masterpiece of intentional erasure. When the investigators managed to track two suitcases to a luggage locker at the Bergen railway station, they hoped for a breakthrough, but instead, they found a curated collection of secrets. Every single garment inside the suitcases had its labels meticulously cut out. Every brand name on her cosmetics had been scraped away, leaving only anonymous jars and vials. Within the lining of the bags, they discovered several wigs, various pairs of non-prescription glasses, and German and Belgian currency tucked into hidden pockets. It was as if the woman had been a ghost long before she reached the Valley of Death. A flickering image of a person who had spent her final months carefully snipping away the threads that tied her to the world of the living. As the search for her origin widened, the police began to encounter a spectral figure who had drifted through the hotels of Norway under a dozen different masks. Staff at various establishments remembered a woman of striking elegance, a traveler who spoke broken English with a heavy accent, or perhaps German or Flemish, and who always seemed to be on the move. She had checked into the Hotel City in Bergen as Genevieve Linier, but in Oslo she was Claudia Tielt, and in Stavanger she was Elizabeth Lienhauer. Witnesses recalled her wearing various wigs and wide-brimmed hats, often sitting alone in hotel dining rooms, exuding an aura of intense and watchful solitude. She was remembered for her peculiar habit of moving tables if she felt someone was sitting too close, and for the faint, sharp scent of garlic that seemed to follow her. A detail that felt domestic and human amidst the growing strangeness of her aliases. You can almost see her now, sitting in the corner of a dimly lit lounge, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusts a wig that doesn't quite fit, her eyes darting toward the door every time the bell chimes. The weight of a dozen false identities sits heavy in her handbag, each one a different life she has stepped into and discarded like a worn-out coat. She is a woman living in the spaces between the lines, a shadow moving through a Europe gripped by the icy tension of the Cold War, where a misplaced word or a lingering gaze could be a death sentence. You feel the cold of the Bergen rain lashing against the hotel windows, matching the chill in her blood as she realizes that the walls are finally closing in, and that the only escape left is the one that leads into the black maw of Isdalen. The investigation eventually uncovered a cryptic diary inside one of the suitcases, a series of coded entries written in blue ink that seemed to map her movements across the continent. When the Norwegian police finally broke the code, they expected meaning. What they found instead was movement without purpose. O for Oslo, B for Bergen, and dates followed by strings of numbers. It revealed a frantic itinerary that zigzagged through Paris, Hamburg, and Basel, before settling into a repetitive and almost obsessive loop through the coastal towns of Norway. The dates in the diary aligned perfectly with her hotel stays, but they offered no clue as to why she was moving with such urgency. The diary was a map of a journey with no destination, a record of a woman who was perpetually arriving and departing, leaving nothing behind but a trail of false names and empty pill bottles. In the shadows of this frantic travel, a darker possibility began to take shape, one that tied the woman to the high-stakes world of international espionage. During the late 1960s and early 70s, Bergen was not just a picturesque port. It was a hub of naval activity where the Norwegian military was testing the top-secret Penguin missile. Reports surfaced of a mysterious woman seen watching military installations, and one fisherman claimed to have seen her observing a secret naval exercise from the shore, her presence as out of place as a swan in a coal mine. This theory suggests that she may have been a spy, perhaps for the Soviet Union, perhaps for Israel's Mossad, tasked with monitoring the cutting-edge technology being developed in the fjords. The meticulous removal of her labels and the use of multiple identities are classic tradecraft, the tools of a professional whose greatest asset is her anonymity. Yet, if she was a seasoned operative, her end in the valley seems inexplicably crude and brutal. If she had been burned by her handlers or caught by an enemy service, the theatrical nature of her death, the pills, the petrol, the monogrammed spoon, feels more like a message than a simple execution. Some investigators argued that the spy theory was a convenient way to categorize a mystery that defied logic, pointing out that no intelligence agency ever stepped forward to claim her, even after the fall of the Iron Curtain. They suggest that the espionage was a shroud for something more personal, perhaps a woman suffering from a profound psychological break, caught in a delusional loop of flight and pursuit. However, this fails to explain how a woman in the throes of a mental crisis could successfully navigate the complex bureaucracy of international travel and forgery with such sustained precision. The narrative of her final days took an even more haunting turn when a witness came forward decades later with a story that had been suppressed by fear. A local man claimed that while hiking in the area days before the body was found, He encountered a woman dressed elegantly for the city, her face contorted in a mask of sheer terror. She was followed by two men in dark coats who looked like foreigners, their presence in the rugged terrain as jarring as her own. As she passed the hiker, she appeared to open her mouth as if to scream, but then looked at the men behind her and remained silent, continuing her walk into the heights of the valley. The police at the time allegedly told the witness to forget what he saw, a detail that fuels the belief that the Isdal woman's death was a matter of national security, a dark secret that the state preferred to keep buried under the Norwegian permafrost. Decades of silence followed her burial in an anonymous grave, until the tools of the 21st century began to whisper the secrets of her bones. In 2016, forensic scientists performed oxygen and strontium isotope analysis on her teeth, a process that acts as a geological record of a person's life. The results were startling. They suggested that the Isdal woman was likely born around 1930 in the borderlands between France and Germany, possibly in the Nuremberg area. Her dental work was high-end, utilizing techniques common in East Asia or Central Europe, further painting the picture of a woman of means and mobility. This scientific revelation shifted the focus from a nameless ghost to a girl who grew up in the shadow of World War II, a child of the European borderlands who may have been displaced or recruited during the chaotic reconstruction of the continent. Despite these modern breakthroughs, the core of the Isdal woman remains an impenetrable void. We know where she likely came from, and we know the agonizing details of how she died. But the bridge between those 2 points is built of shadows and contradictions. Was she a survivor of the war who found herself entangled in the invisible wars of the 1970s, or was she a lone soul fleeing a private demon that finally caught up to her in the Valley of Death? Every piece of evidence, the filed-down spoon, the wigs, the smell of garlic, the scorched passport, is a puzzle piece from a set that no longer exists. She remains a haunting reminder of how easily a human life can be dismantled and erased, leaving behind only a charred silhouette against the indifferent gray stone of the Norwegian wilderness. The wind in Isdalen still carries a certain weight, a cold that seems to bypass the skin and settle directly into the marrow. As the sun dips behind the jagged peaks, casting long and skeletal shadows across the scree, you realize that the woman's true name may never be spoken again. She is a permanent resident of the silence, a figure forever caught in that final, terrifying moment where the fire met the frost. You turn to leave the valley, your own footsteps echoing against the rocks, but the feeling of being watched doesn't fade. The mystery of the Isdal woman isn't just about a cold case or a dead spy. It is the unsettling realization that someone can walk among us, eat in our hotels, and travel our paths, all while being utterly and terrifyingly alone in a world that has already forgotten they exist.